Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Building Resilient Solutions. This webinar is all about improving the performance of your team or organization. My name is Mark Sheldon. I'm the founder and CEO of Savant, a C-suite search specialist. We specialize in finance technology as well as executive coaching. In a few moments, I'll introduce you to my co-presenter, Zoe Williams. But first, let me introduce you to the agenda for the webinar. So on this morning's webinar, we've got 4 key areas we're going to cover. The change curve revisited, what is resilience, boundaries between home and work, and doing more with less, the focus on key strengths. After each session, we'll have time for Q&A, so please send your questions through to us at any time. Support documents have already been loaded onto the webinar library, so you're free to download those as well to support the process. We'll have a number of poll questions during the webinar. Please commit, give your answers. We'll give you the results and the feedback. It'll be very interesting to get the consensus opinion. And afterwards, you'll be invited to give your feedback on the presentations. So please complete that. Your feedback is much appreciated. Savant and Luminary Mindsets have given our services and providing this webinar for free today. However, as we're all aware, these difficult times, particularly this time of the year and with the snow last weekend, we would ask for a donation to our nominated charity, which is Action for Children. A £10 donation will make a real difference. This year, at least 100,000 children will sleep rough at some point during the year. They start by leaving home, going to friends, sleeping on their sofas, then unfortunately reaching some point of homelessness and sleeping on the streets. So all your support, or any support, even a £10 donation, will make a real difference to support children and prevent youth homelessness in the UK. Returning to the topic of the webinar, what's the definition of resilience? The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, perhaps toughness, I suppose. The ability to spring back into shape, elasticity. I think we often define this, and really now, as more psychological resilience. The ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis, or I suppose return to a pre-crisis state of mind or status. Protecting ourselves from negative effects of stress is a big part of the way we live at the moment. And so I think we need to look at the key 5 pillars of resilience and what they're made up of. Those 5 pillars define as self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, positive relationships, and having purpose. By strengthening these pillars, we can in turn individually become more resilient, and of course as a team. To my mind personally, optimism is the key to this. We have to be optimistic. Nobody needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world or their own life. We need to not give up, and we must interpret setbacks as temporary, hopefully localized and changeable, to create an optimistic mindset. I think in all our experiences in life, it's impossible to succeed or to move forward without failing at something. You have to give it your all to succeed, and so moving cautiously will not deliver the outcome that you hope for. In life, a strong sense of meaning does result in better performance. Optimism can spread from a leader or from their team. That is what we have to do. We have to be leaders at this time, whether it's to our work environments, to our colleagues, or to our friends and families. This is the challenge, to lead positively in these difficult times. So, I suppose, let me introduce you to Zoe. I first met Zoe probably 3 years ago now, and was immediately impressed by her energy, which she'll show later. She's credible, and she has lots of insight into many subjects from the perspective of emotional intelligence. I think she's now a coach with over 15 years of experience of working in the FTSE 100 or 250 environment, particularly in finance, risk, and audit teams. She's worked closely with CEOs, executives, and non-exec directors. We've now presented, I think it's webinars over 10 times together. So we should be used to each other and understand what's about to happen, but each individual webinar is special. So let's hope this is a good one. So in partnership, we've developed a portfolio of executive coaching services available via Savant, working with Zoe, to our customers on a one-to-one or a team basis. Some recipients may be on the call on the webinar today, so feel free to ask further questions and reach out to find more information about how we can support individuals and your teams. So I'm pleased to hand over to Zoe. Enjoy the webinar. Please do ask questions and participate in the polls. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. This is, like Mark said, the 10th. I can't believe we've done 10, Mark. That's incredible. We used to do these in person in the Shard in London many years ago, and now, of course, everything's online, which means we get to access more people. But of course, it means that that level of connection and interaction and energy that I used to bring in person is slightly different and a little bit more two-dimensional. So as Mark said, you've got your comments box. Please, 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 as questions come up into your mind, just type them in there. I'm going to keep asking Mark to tell me what the questions are as they come in so that we can answer them and make it as interactive as we possibly can. And like Mark said, we have designed some poll questions as well, just to get a feel for how the theory and the context that I'm going to be sharing with you over the next 45 minutes or so, how that's showing up in you, in your workplace, and the way that you're operating as a leader at the moment. So without further ado, I will get started. So Mark took us through the agenda. So we're going to start with the change curve revisited, because I know a number of you have been on some of these webinars before, and the change curve is one of the diagrams that I like to use to illustrate the experience that people are either having or have had. I think we can probably still use the word having, because nothing is resolved yet, but I'm talking about global change there, in terms of the pandemic and what's going on in our external environment. But then I know lots of organisations are still pushing on with internal change programs and organisational change programs and operational change programs. So there is a lot of change around us at the moment. And the reason I wanted to talk about the change curve and the emotional experience that people are having is because emotions drive our decision making and our behaviour. How we feel about something is going to influence the way what's happening around us is perceived, and therefore how we choose to respond to it. So it's really important that not just leaders, but us as individuals, we understand this change curve and how we're experiencing it, and then noticing how people around us are experiencing it. Now, this change curve is not linear. So you don't do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 in a linear fashion. You can go to step 2 and get stuck, or you can go to step 2 and then go back to step 1, or you can accelerate through one stage and not even notice that you were there potentially. So it's very, very personal, and it depends on a number of things, resilience being one of those key factors. So to Mark's point, resilience and the ability to bounce back from adversity or change, that's where people will come out of the anger or the stage 2 phase much more quickly if they feel like they have their resilience being supported. So notice, if you are a leader of teams, notice on this change curve if anybody might be stuck anywhere and what you can do to help support them move forward. You need to know how to move your organisation through this change curve. And for me, it was all about listening and acceptance. So if somebody's stuck, there's nothing worse than saying to them, come on, pull your socks up, you've got to, we just got to get on with this. There's a lot of value in accepting where people are at and just having them be heard and having them feel supported. This change curve, actually, if we go on to the next slide, what it does is, from a physiological perspective, because we've got a negativity bias running in the background in our brains all the time, this change in our environment causes our brain to scan and look for and try and perceive any danger or risk, which is that negativity bias. What happens when we perceive risk or danger or change that we don't think is going to be good for us? Our brain then reacts in either a fight, flight, or freeze response. Most of us will have heard of this. The hypothalamus gets activated, which tells the pineal gland to then release stress hormone. Now, a lot of us can operate quite well in stressful situations, and some of us even need stress to perform. So again, it's on an individual basis. So there's no generalization here at all. It's just it's useful to understand yourself from this perspective, and then be able to understand other people as well. But what happens if this cyclical effect of stress hormone being released and then more external stimulus coming in that's signaling to the brain danger or risk, and then more stress hormone being released? Eventually it can lead to very low morale and motivation. The remote working situation that we're all in at the moment is causing some levels of anxiety and disconnection, which means that people aren't getting the normal support structures that they're used to that would signal to the brain to calm down. You know, for me, it would be that I'd go and find a trusted colleague who was someone that I could confide in. We'd have a cup of tea or coffee, and just talking it out over a cup of coffee would signal to my body and my brain, oh, actually, there's less danger than I'm perceiving. Those kind of interactions aren't possible at the moment. So people aren't having this circuit be broken as frequently as they possibly need. So it's really important that we're checking in on our teams and providing them with an opportunity to circuit break this and get some light relief from it. Now, what I've heard is that people are booking Zoom meetings, 30-minute Zoom meetings, for what previously might have been a pass in the corridor conversation. I understand why that's happening, but again, it's really important, we'll come on to this later, that we're not exasperating this issue with some of the rhythms and routines that we're putting in place that we think or feel are necessary that might not actually be necessary at all. So checking in on the well-being of your teams is harder, but more essential than ever. And these waves of emotion are definitely making leadership and management harder at the moment. And you won't necessarily know who's in which emotional state. So the fight, the people who respond with fight are more obvious. So if they go into a fight response mode, they will be the ones that back in April and May last year, they probably performed better. They probably came out with big ideas, big motivation, big energy to resolve the problems around them that were being caused by the pandemic. And they were the ones that you would have gone, wow, okay, they're in action, they're in execution mode. They probably have reached a point of burnout now, and they might have withdrawn, and you might notice that their performance has dwindled. Reach out to them and provide support from a energy perspective, because they would have been the fight responders. Flight is a different one. We'll come on to that last, but freeze is where you would have noticed that people would literally freeze. So procrastination is a freeze response that you can see and that is visible. However, a freeze individual understands the need to still have action be taken, so they probably would delegate, or they'd ask for support, or they'd lean on others. So although they're feeling the need to freeze, they understand that there still needs to be momentum around them. So those people might not be in a state of freeze anymore, but just check in with them and check that they're actually feeling confident enough to take some action themselves, because you might have lost some resource through freeze response. And then flight, the most problematic, those are the ones that will have asked for furlough. They are the ones that will have resigned potentially. They are the ones that would have gone off work sick, because they actually just want to get away from the cause of the stress. They want to run away from it, and they want to remove themselves from the environment completely. So those are definitely the ones that need an arm putting around them very quickly, and a listening ear, and their nervous system just needs to be calmed down and reassured. So we've got poll 1, which I think is really interesting when we've done this the last couple of times, Mark. So poll 1, if you wouldn't mind putting that up, I'd love for everyone to let us know which survival leadership style you've identified with. Is it fight, flight, or freeze? What is your go-to when you perceive that there's some risk or change or uncertainty around you? Let's see what people come back with. This is always a really interesting result. I'm a fighter. As if you'd have to, I mean, I wouldn't need to tell anybody that, would I? But fighters are the ones that people like having in teams, but there is a big risk of burnout, You've got to be careful with fighters. Have we got the results coming in?
Yeah, we've got 87% of people have responded, so there we go, we're up to 90. I'll just leave it running another 5 or 10 seconds, so hopefully we get 100%.
Yeah, that would be great if we could get 100% participation, just to see where people are at.
Okay, well, that's a minute, so I'll close it off now, but that's basically 91% of people have voted.
Thank you, everybody.
So that was the result.
You'll have to tell me, because I can't see it because I'm sharing screen.
So we have, what survival leadership style have you identified with? Fight,
yeah,
74%.
Yeah.
Flight, 0, and freeze, 33.
Yeah, now that's consistent with the other times that we've pushed out this poll, which is interesting, because it's around 70% is around the average response on fight, which is why resilience is so important. Because if this cortisol adrenal gland stimulation continues on and on and on, people will find their energy dipping. So we'll come on to that later. Thank you, everybody, for responding to that. That's really super interesting. So strategies to deal with this. Well, for me, it definitely is important to share the change curve and share with people what you've learned about what's going on internally for yourself. So if you're a fight or a freeze person, then, you know, sharing with your family, with your teams, anybody that might be impacted by your leadership style, and then ask them to be curious about themselves as well. Teams that talk about this kind of thing are the ones that build trust and can support each other the best when you're being open about your emotional well-being and your emotional state. Never ever obviously force it or respond with any kind of judgment, which of course I know people wouldn't, but it's really important, especially at the moment, that teams can feel safe to talk about this stuff. So that's why I say here on point 2, create a language around emotional intelligence that isn't threatening, because of course in this heightened state of stress, the nervous system is signaling to the ears and the eyes scan for danger. So that means obviously they're looking for danger, but the danger in corporate world isn't what we see, it's what we hear. It's the communication that we hear, the filter we have going on inside of our ears, and the interpretation that we make what we've heard mean. So be careful to create a very reassuring and non-threatening language around emotional intelligence. Normalize taking breaks. So that takes me back to what I said about the 30-minute Zoom calls for a 10-minute conversation. Do Zoom calls, encourage teams to, if you can go out and do your hour exercise while on calls, and actually just have calls outside, walking in the snow, or, you know, wrap up warm, or even just walking around a different room in the house, because I know most people are working in the same space, just moving from one room to another and then walking around, or doing something to do with movement or motion, just to break the I think you said, Mark, Groundhog Day effect up, just break that up and try and bring some variety. And then start creating a new culture, because I think we're all realizing now, if we look at the change curve, we're no longer in a state of denial or frustration about all of this. We're kind of in a place of acceptance and, okay, well, what can I do to actually make this work? How can we make this work now that this seems to be the way it's going to be for goodness knows how long, but potentially a little while longer than we initially expected. So start creating a new culture and set the behaviors that you're going to need people to be demonstrating to move the organisation forward while maintaining their resilience. I think one of the most important things here is that people need some space, and I know that's very difficult at the moment with everything that's going on, but it is critical that even just 30 minutes a day, people are encouraged to just find some space where they can either do some breathing, some meditation, some zoning out by reading a book or doing a jigsaw puzzle or anything to just break, because this is a cycle. This nervous system response is a cycle. It just needs something to break it, just to give the brain some respite and the body some respite from the what might feel like a vicious cycle that's going on between the mind and the body. Do we have any questions, Mark?
Not around the topic. Santosh has asked just about accessing the PDFs in that. If you go to the handout section, which you should have on the right hand side, you should be able to access 3 separate handouts. They're there to be able to download. If you've got any problems, send me another message, but yeah, that was the only question at this stage.
Great, perfect. So before we move on to what is resilience and boundaries, the creating the new culture and setting expected behaviours is really critical from a resilience and change perspective. So we've got another poll where I'm just curious how many people on this webinar have actually thought about setting expected behaviours to try and manage resilience. So poll 2, Mark, if you don't mind, is, have you set and embedded expected behaviours for dealing with uncertainty? Now, what I mean here is we're now operating in a completely different environment, so that may almost probably require a different set of behaviours from ourselves as leaders and from our teams to be able to deal with the uncertainty and change that's going on around us. Now, if leaders don't set those new behaviours clearly, the organisation can sometimes feel a little bit lost and uncertain as to what it is that's expected of them and how it is that they're meant to be showing up and operating. For example, I know early on last year there were a lot of people, individuals and teams, that assumed because they were on Zoom calls and they were at home, that meant that they should be accessible, you know, out of hours, as it were. So people started working much longer days and giving up much more of their time to work, because there wasn't clarity from leadership around, well, actually we expect you to still put boundaries in place around your work-life balance. We don't expect you, now that you're sat at home in one room, to be online all the time. So it's that kind of question. How many of you have actually thought about that and being clear with your team, setting those expectations? So it'd be interesting to see how many people did that last year. If you haven't done it last year, don't worry. This year is a great opportunity to do that. And we'll come on to it more in boundaries when we talk about boundaries in a moment.
Okay. We're up to 85%.
Yeah.
So we're back.
Thank
you for everyone participating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got to 89%. Oh, we're back to, okay, 91. Okay. So I'm going to shut the poll off at that point. Okay.
Right.
Now, I've just shared the results. So have you set and embedded expected behaviors for dealing with uncertainty? Yes, 2002 required new behaviors to be defined, 29%. No, I was focused on this in 2020, 36%. And somewhat in areas we have addressed this, 36%. So very, very even.
Very, very even. And that's, again, that's consistent. And it's for various different reasons. I know different people have got different things going on within their organizations, but it would be something that I would urge everybody to take a look at going forward into 2021 for sure, especially from a resilience perspective. Thank you, everybody. So what is resilience? Mark has already touched on this for us, which is great. But resilience, really, to sort of echo what Mark said, is it's the ability of people or things to feel better quickly after something unpleasant, such as a shock, injury, etc. So you'll notice that people get their resilience tested all the time when they either have injuries and break a bone, or get an illness, or a child, for example, if you're a mother or father, if your child gets sick, that really tests our resilience, doesn't it? Because we have to bounce back quite quickly from the shock of that. So there's a lot of experiences in our life that test our resilience, and one of the things that I believe builds our emotional intelligence are these events, these life events that test us. Negative life events, or perceived negative life events, can really test our resilience, but strengthen it and develop it. So this wheel that I'm showing you on the left is part of the psychometric tool that I use with my clients to measure their emotional intelligence. And you'll see on the wheel, all around the outside of the wheel, is well-being, because really key focus for emotional intelligence is well-being, and that ability to notice what's going on internally with our own emotions, be able to regulate that, so being able to choose the emotion that we're feeling rather than have the emotion control us and our responses to the world around us. But then also part of this tool is all about the interpersonal and the decision making, which is to do with other people. So how can we notice what's going on inside other people? And I mean inside rather than what they're saying. How can we notice what they're feeling and how they're perceiving the world, so that we can better influence them from a relationship perspective, but a decision-making perspective as well. So this is really powerful, powerful insight when understood in enough detail, I guess. And what it can bring to teams and individuals is it can bring a leader who's very connected to the environment around them, very connected to what's going on, very connected and kind of plugged into the team, both at an individual level but at a group level. And then how that makes the team feel is it makes them feel supported and understood, but it also makes them feel safe to do the same at their level with their peers. So then you create this kind of emotionally intelligent culture, which is very resilient, very connected, with strong interpersonal skills and high levels of trust, because of the psychological safety that's created through understanding this work. So the key emotional intelligence skills that I work with individuals and teams on when we're talking specifically about resilience are the three that I've illustrated here. So if you really want to help your teams with their resilience, you want to help them develop their reality testing. Now, reality testing is there's something that happens in our brain when we receive new information. The information comes in, so something happens. We receive an email, or we have a phone call, something happens. That information goes in through our senses, and then our brain, which is effectively just a computer, makes meaning. It makes it mean something. So, oh, I've just heard that means X, or I've just seen that means Y. Now, the meaning that we make out of what's happened isn't actually what's happened. It's an add-on. It's an extension of what's happened. And people who reality test really, really well are the ones who don't add too much onto the what's happened. You'll notice sometimes if you receive some news, you might go, oh, that means this, and then that means that. Oh, well, that'll then mean that. And then there's this whole chain of thought events that then can come off the back of just one event. And what we don't want to do is have that happen. One, it's very exhausting and draining. It can lead to poor decision making, but it can also lead to a huge amount of procrastination and inaction, which takes up time and energy. So reality testing, pulling people back to the what's happened. This is a coaching technique that I use with clients is, okay, let's just focus on the what happened. Yes, it might mean X, Y, and Z, but let's just ground ourselves in the what happened and try and focus on that for a little while longer. That's one of those circuit breakers, which will stop the brain from over exaggerating the situation and releasing the stress hormone. Emotional self-awareness, the second one, well, it is what it says on the tin. So understanding our own emotions. A lot of us don't feel when we're at work. It's not something that we're encouraged to do. It's not something that's necessarily seen as helpful. I think at the moment it's really helpful to be feeling and understanding our emotions. We're kind of in a safe space as well. You know, we're in our own homes, most of us, and we have got the opportunity to go off and have a couple of minutes quiet space on our own. Open plan offices caused us a bit of an emotional intelligence problem a decade ago when they said we're going to go all open plan and hot desk. It didn't really give people that safety of, you know what, if something's really just upset me or triggered me, I don't really have anywhere to go to pull myself together and sort it out. So emotional self-awareness at home is something that I practice a lot, and I would encourage others to do so as well. And then the impulse control. So that is that gap between input, new information, meaning, and then response or reaction. Now, the faster that process occurs, the lower your impulse control is. And what we'd like people to start doing is pausing. So new information in, the meaning gets made immediately. We can't stop that. That's our subconscious brain. That's what the brain does. But what you want to do is pause and break that pattern again. Do something. Whatever is going to work for you. For me, it's breathing. So I'll just do some, 2 or 3 deep breaths just to signal to the brain, hang on a second, things may not be as they appear. I'm not going to react to this. I'm not going to be impulsive. I'm going to let my nervous system calm down before I actually send a response or do anything. So these are all kind of daily habits, but something that we can incorporate into our teams in every interaction that we have with our teams, just to say, look, can we reality test this? Are we aware of how this is making us feel? And are we being too reactive right now? Are questions that I would ask teams when talking to them about resilience. Are there any questions, Mark?
Not at this stage. Please do ask questions, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so we'll keep rolling forward, my friend. Yeah, we must be answering more as we go along. I can't believe it.
This never happens. I'm obviously just being so clear. Or if I'm not, please let me know, because I'd love to answer them if I'm not being clear. Right, so here are the strategies to take away. So measure your team's resilience. It'll change. I mean, it's like the change curve. It'll fluctuate. It'll be all over the place depending on what's going on at home and what's going on at work. So test it. There are lots of ways to do that. I've got access to an online resilience questionnaire if anybody wants me to send that to them to use with their teams. But there are lots of resources out there that you can use to measure your team's resilience. And please put emotional intelligence support systems in place, such as, again, going back to this definition of what behaviours you want to see. What does reality testing look like for you personally as a leader and for your teams? And always ask permission. So because people are in either fight, flight or freeze mode some of the time at the moment, not all of the time, but some of the time, you will never know at what point on the change curve and in what state their nervous system is 100%. So asking permission and making sure that people feel safe is really, really important, because there are a lot of people who obviously don't feel safe right now, both physically and emotionally. So keeping the dialogue impersonal, not using the words you or me, but using words like we, our, us. So it sounds collective, together. It's not, you're not separating yourself from your team by saying I and me and you. Make it sound very connected and together if you can. And again, that goes back to developing an emotional intelligence language that you can use with your team to have that nervous system response soothed or at least reduced somewhat.
So we have We now have some questions coming. So let's kick on
I'm
the
not
women.
being that clear. Brilliant.
In
Go on, go
in these,
for it.
okay, in these days of quick gratification, how do we avoid impulse responses?
Well, in these days of quick gratification, now that's interesting, isn't it? Because I would like to understand, if I was asking that question, why are we looking for quick gratification? What is it that we're trying to resolve by gratifying things quickly? I know there is a pressure at the moment to get more done with less, and because people are now stretched from a time perspective, which we'll come on to when we talk about boundaries. But really, looking at the payoff and cost of that is probably a useful strategy. So payoff is generally short-termism, and the cost is the longer term, and really getting people aware of, okay, well, if we continue to behave from a reactive space, what is the potential cost longer term? It's not even, I wouldn't even use the word potential. I mean, if people are in a reactive state from a nervous system perspective and an emotional intelligence perspective, that's going to impact on their stress management. It doesn't only impact on decision making, but there is this other part of the wheel here, which is stress management, and that part of our emotional intelligence is what really gets tested when we're being highly impulsive and highly reactive. So I would look at the payoff and the cost. Some people are actually quite addicted to stress hormone. I mean, especially the fighters. We've got 70% of people who feel that that's necessary to get stuff done. So you might find it quite difficult to give up the reactive sort of state, but in the longer term, it's gonna benefit you.
I think the context of that is a little bit further. Is I think there's lots of different medium, WhatsApp, emails, Teams, chats, etc., that everything pressurizes that you've got to be on call the whole time. There's an immediacy for you to respond very quickly, which perhaps wasn't there before.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in boundaries. That's a good one to lead us into boundaries. Thank you.
Obviously, you maybe just led into that, but another question: any practical tips to develop impulse control?
Well, yes. So it's the boundaries piece. So should we move on to boundaries? Yeah. Is there another question about that?
Well, let me just see. Yeah, the other question around that subject before we move on then is, how do you notice these behaviours when your only dialogue is on a web call?
How do you notice them in yourself? First off, is the body scanning.
I think the person probably means, I think they know.
Right. So so that's a really good question, because what I had to do to develop that skill set was to understand myself first. So you can't notice what you don't know in yourself. So everything that we notice in other people is a direct mirror of what we know about ourselves. So you can't see happiness in another person if you're not happy, if you don't know happiness yourself. You can't see sadness if you don't know sadness, if that makes sense. So in order for you to be able to notice how somebody else might be feeling through a Zoom call, you need to be able to be self-aware. That's why self-awareness, if I go back, was it here, emotional self-awareness is one of the most important elements of EQ, because we can't notice in others what we don't know about ourselves. And so really understanding, okay, well, what do I do from a postural perspective when I'm feeling that way? What do I do? How does my face look? How does my voice sound? Do I use my hands more or less? Notice how you're showing up and who you're being when you're in your different emotional states, and then you can start noticing it in other people. There's a lot of very well trained, especially in like Secret Service and the police and whatnot. They're trained in being able to read people like this, being able to read someone's emotional state even across the screen. So it is possible. It's not that difficult, but it's all about self-awareness first. Oh, I've lost you, Mark. I don't know if that's you or me. Oh, say that again, please. So you've gone a bit R2D2, and I'm hoping that that's... So I'm going to keep going, and you're going to let me know if I should stop. But I think we've lost Mark temporarily, some internet glitches. Questions will come back online in a second. So I'm going to assume that you can all still see me and keep going into boundaries. Darren, could you let me know somehow that I'm still people can still hear me, and I'll just keep talking through the presentation. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, we can still see and hear you.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll keep going. So, boundaries at home and work. So this is why it's great that those questions came up, because I'm telling you all of this is going on with you internally, and then you're saying, yeah, but what do I do about it? Because it's, you know, it's causing me a problem. And working from home and being in lockdown is a huge problem. And if you've got children, having the kids at home, and if you've got a partner, having them at home as well, and not having access to your normal childcare. So big issue right now. And I'm not going to say it's easy to put boundaries in place at the moment. It's not. But from a resilience perspective, especially if you're noticing that you're feeling like you have to respond to things quickly, that for me is all to do with this limbic nervous system stress response going on. Now, there definitely will be times when there is a requirement for you to respond quickly. But what I've noticed happening is it's become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy across entire organizations. So because everybody is in this state, or almost everybody, there is no clarity to notice that actually, why are we doing this? Why is everybody reacting so quickly to everything? It's because everybody else is. So if I take you back to that moment in time, that I don't know whether it was funny or horrifying last year when everybody started panic buying toilet roll. Now, there is absolutely no logical reason. We all now realize there was no logic behind that whatsoever. It was this stress response at its worst and best being played out. And because everybody was doing it, most people followed, because our nervous systems are connected. So if you are seeing other people responding quickly and people are responding to you within seconds or minutes, your nervous system will be going, okay, right, yeah, we need to wire and fire, we need to wire and fire. And it's just being created from a group, a collective stress response. So boundaries are really important, and it's hard to go against the grain because there's a perceived expectation and there's a perceived belief that we have to respond to things really quickly. So first point on this slide, while everyone seems to be playing the short game, play the long game. What that means is what's happening around you does not need to be that way. So you don't need to be challenging, you don't need to be countercultural or be seen to be ineffective or blocking any, you know, blocking progress. But what is happening is there is too much reinforcement of this behaviour going on at the moment, and it's really important, especially for the next 2 or 3 months in the UK, that people question, like we should have done when the toilet paper thing was going on, like stop, question, do the reality testing. Hang on a second, what is actually happening? Do I need 40 rolls of toilet roll, or do I need to be focusing on something else? It's maybe a tongue-in-cheek example, but it was at the time the best example of what's actually playing out for us physiologically and emotionally. So reality testing, pausing, and doing anything you can to break the pattern of reacting and responding from a place of nervous system activation. So like I said, for me, it's just, okay, I can feel it. So the emotional self-awareness, okay, I can feel it. My rib cage goes tighter, my breathing is from above the belly, not below the belly. And I get kind of a hot face, like hot in the cheeks, a hot face, and my hands get a bit warmer. So when that happens to me, I know, okay, right, I've just got to sit down and take a few breaths, because I'm not going to respond from a place of rational thinking here. I'm probably going to respond differently to what I want to. So the emotional self-awareness is the first one. The second point on here is undertaking a resources audit. So where are you putting your energy? Where are you putting your time and your energy? Where are you putting it in such a way that you know you're not doing it because you know that's what's needed, but you're doing it because there's a perception that it's expected. Now, boundaries and expectations are kind of, there's a love-hate relationship between the two. We believe, or we make up the story in our minds, that there's an expectation on us, either communicated or not, and then we don't uphold our boundaries in order to meet that expectation, because there might be fear that we're going to lose our job, there might be fear that we're going to let others down, there might be anxiety about underperforming. So again, look at where you're putting your time and energy and really reality test. Okay, if I was in the middle of the toilet roll situation right now and Zoe was stood there and she took me out of the situation, and she got me to look at it objectively. Do I really need to be doing this, or am I reacting to some kind of emotion? Am I trying to compensate for something? With your teams, it's really important that you encourage this open dialogue. And going back to the communication piece, having people feel safe to say, do you know what, I am working 15 hours. I'm checking my emails in the middle of the night. It's waking me up. And then feeling equipped to help them, which is what I'm trying to educate us on all now, which is, okay, you're self-aware, so acknowledge the fact that they're aware of themselves and they've put their hand up and said, I'm not doing this well. And then make sure that they're checking in reality testing and managing their impulse control through breaking that nervous system pattern. So if there was one thing that you all took away from today's webinar, is have people in your teams identify what their pattern break strategy is going to be. And ideally it would be something that involves asking for support, but not everyone wants to do that. Different people reach out at different times, but identifying when there needs to be a pattern break and then executing on that is really, really important. Consistency is a measure of your integrity. So if you're a leader and you're going to say to your team, okay, team, nobody should be online after, I don't know, 7 o'clock at night or whatever you choose, you have to 100% of the time commit to being that yourself. Now, all organizational culture is a direct mirror and reflection of the leadership behavior, and either conscious or subconscious, and that's a big statement to make, but it's very much backed up by studies that, you know, leaders are giving out signals all the time, consciously and subconsciously, which is creating the culture beneath them. So consistency is a really important factor here. And just the fact that burnout is visible to others as part of your corporate brand, and it can be quite damaging from a reputational perspective and a staff retention perspective. You know, you want people to be advocates of your organisation. You don't want them to be going home to their families and saying, "Oh God, you know, I just wasn't looked after by that organisation, or I didn't feel supported." And the final point is an obvious one, but it's very, very important: agreeing with your team. So rather than imposing boundaries on them, actually having them say what their needs are. You're going to have different situations. Some person's got 3 kids, some person's got no kids, and they're on their own. The person on their own wants to be connected in. The person with the 3 kids and the husband or wife at home actually just wants to be left alone to get on with their work and then go and meet the needs of their family. So different needs, different individual situations going on. So agree the boundaries within your teams and hold each other accountable with care. Not from a place of judgment, but from a, you know, I genuinely care about you and I really want to make sure that you're okay, but I would also like you to make sure I'm okay as well. So don't forget to have your team support you as well. We do, as leaders, often decide subconsciously that we're responsible for everybody's well-being. I mean, yes, to a degree we are, but at the same time, individuals have to be responsible as well, and we need looking after equally. Have we got Mark back, Darren, or am I still flying solo? Oh, I'm still flying solo. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, at the moment, bear with me just a moment. I said that I'd answer a few of the questions. I thought I'd step in. I've just spoken to someone, having a few connections.
This is the person that actually makes the magic happen. So thank you, Sarah. So have we got any more questions?
Yes, we have. Bear with me just a moment.
Thank you. I'm so pleased you got to show your face. This is great.
It's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you assess someone else's emotional intelligence when it appears so alien to your own?
Well, yes, great question. And this is the first thing that I do with any individual or team that I work with, is what I call self-mastery. So it doesn't take long. It takes normally two or three sessions, but it's all about understanding yourself. And it can be confronting, it can be liberating, it can be eye-opening, it can be one of my clients a couple of weeks ago, when he had the kind of, I call it the sort of aha moment, he just laughed for a couple of minutes. He just couldn't believe, you know, the way in which he'd been being and the impact it had been having on himself and his teams, and how he just hadn't seen it because it felt obvious to him. So that was kind of nice to experience that with him. But it's all about self-awareness and understanding yourself, because once you know what it looks like and what it feels like to have low impulse control, or to be in reality testing mode, or to be really, you know, demonstrating interpersonal skills across a Zoom. Like, for example, I'll run events with 20, 30 people, and I'm a head on a screen, and they're all in a room together, because some of my clients are actually on site together here in Australia. And again, building up interpersonal skills across a screen, and using facial expressions and hand gestures, personal information, is all part of your own emotional intelligence, and then you can notice it in others. So self-awareness is the short answer, and that was the kind of longer answer. Mark's back. Hi, Mark. Well done. Any more questions, Darren?
Yep, so the next one is, do companies send out surveys to measure the pulse of their employees in terms of mental well-being?
Yes, do they? Yes, definitely, for sure. And if they're not at the moment, please do. There are a lot of resources out there, and if anybody wants me to point you in the right direction, I've got a couple of associate companies that I could recommend to you. But I personally, if I was leading a team right now, I would be sending out pulse surveys on mental well-being very regularly. There is in some areas too much stigma, too much fear around mental well-being. If people label it as a negative thing, it can have people feel like they don't want to be, you know, is this going to put my job at risk? Or, you know, I've got a really good example of a person that used to work for me when I was in my corporate role a couple of years ago, and he came to me and confided because he felt he had no other option, but he'd been struggling with it for months on his own. And he'd actually been diagnosed with a mental health issue by his doctor, and he'd been trying to cope with it on his own. And it was all because of fear that there was going to be some kind of repercussion on him and his job. Well, that, of course, firstly, it's illegal. You can't do that, thank goodness. But secondly, from a compassionate perspective, that just shouldn't even be an option from a compassionate and humanity perspective. So yes, please send out pulse surveys. Please encourage people that now is the time for us to be supporting each other more than ever with this stuff.
Great. I think that's all of the ones. Oh, sorry, we have just had a few more come through.
Fantastic.
How do you constructively manage upward where the tone isn't set from the top? What kind of dialogue could be had in this respect?
Okay, so this is all about the listening, and that's a really great question. So we all have, at any moment in time, we're in a different state of consciousness, depending on our nervous system, where it's how highly it's activated. So if you're in a stress state, your listening and your perception is going to be off. It's going to be from a place of judgment or fear or anxiety or concern. So what you want to do when you're managing upwards is you want to set your communication at the level of consciousness that you want them to listen to you from. So for example, if you want them to be open and accepting of what you're saying, you've got to go in really open and accepting. So use open language, use open body language, use an open face, and even open your hands. Like doing something like that and gesturing like that signals to the person's subconscious brain openness and willingness. When we go into conversations with management and we're expecting them to respond in a certain way, so we're feeling fearful or uncertain, or physiologically our body closes in, our throat tightens, and the body can actually give off stress signals. So, you know, you've probably heard of horses being able to pick up on scared people. Well, we're no different. Like, we're the same as horses. They don't have like a seventh sense. It's just that it's not being studied so much. So when you're trying to manage upwards, decide what kind of listening you want them to have of you, and then create that within yourself before you go into that communication.
Great. And then we just got one final one here. On your consistency point, if we agree as a team that we work flexibly, so some people work in the evening, including me at times, is it okay from an integrity point of view?
Definitely, because integrity for me is being your word. So whatever you say you're going to do it. If you say you're going to work at night, work at night. If you can't be your word because breakdowns happen and stuff gets in the way, as long as you're in communication. So if I say to, you know, a client, I'm going to do X, and then I realize I can't for whatever reason, a problem with my son or whatever, immediate communication, clean it up, apologize, make it good, and move on. So that for me is what integrity is. It's about being your word, and when you can't, being in communication and making it right. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. So that's all the questions we have at the moment.
Wonderful. Well, we've got one little final bit, which is to do with strengths. So this is the positive piece, which I wanted to share with people. So you've got the boundary setting, but then of course, thanks, Darren. Thank you so much. Doing more with less. So one of the big wins that I have over the last couple of years used with my clients is strengths-based coaching, where basically you can't, this slide says it all, you can't build performance on weaknesses, you can build only on strengths. And when people's resilience is low and they're not necessarily feeling their usual selves and they haven't got the energy that they would normally have, having people play to their strengths is a brilliant, really quick way of building resilience, because when we're playing to our strengths, we're in a state of what's called flow. So we're naturally more motivated to do things that are our preference. We're naturally, we feel better, we feel good, we feel accomplished, we feel valued. So if you've got this Clifton Strengths Finder quote here, there's a thing on a questionnaire online, Clifton Strengths Finder. Have I got my book? No, I haven't, but I will do for the next one. Get people in your team to do the Clifton Strengths Finder. It tells you what their top 5 strengths are, which is a preference. So it doesn't necessarily, you might look at it and go, oh, they don't look like they're very good at that. It's not about what's actually happening, it's what the preference is internally. And if you can have people play to at least 1 or 2 of their strengths in everything that they do, you will see a dramatic difference in their engagement and motivation and resilience for sure. So here's a little screenshot of that test. You can go online and buy it yourselves. You don't need me to help you do this, but if you want me to send you the link, I can. And what I've just done with one CEO is I've had him, he's only got a small company, 34 people, but he's had the entire organization run this test, and they're now having conversations to people's strengths. So again, the listening is wide open, right? Because someone who, say, for example, on this one, got a futuristic preference, when you're talking about future and visioning and plan, their ears are going to be wide open and their brain is going to be receptive, and you're going to be creating an emotional response to the conversation that is positive, as opposed to if you talk to a futuristic person about what went wrong 2 months ago on a project and lessons learned, they're probably going to, you know, see the difference. So it says here, people who are focused on using their strengths are excellent quality of life, which is obviously what we all want, but they're 6 times more likely to be engaged in their jobs because of the effect that it has on their listening and that physical response, that feeling that working to our strengths and our preferences gives us. And finally, people experience more positive energy, they're more likely to achieve their goals, and it's just this productivity point, 12.5% greater productivity. Now, these are big studies. Clifton Strengths Finder is a big organization in America. And for me, again, boundaries, focusing on strengths and bringing some positivity to what people are doing. And you don't have to talk about it like it's, you know, it doesn't have to be at the forefront of everyone's mind. It's just knowing and understanding, what are my strengths? What do I feel good doing? And what are other people's preferences as well? Great leadership skill. So key takeaways. I love this. I don't know if Albert Einstein did say this, but let's pretend he did, because that's what the internet told me. So everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Now, we spend a lot of time as leaders asking fish to climb trees. And our entire HR culture is formed around asking a fish to climb a tree, really, because we're looking at the gaps, we're looking at the deficits, we're looking at the performance improvement. You know, you need to improve. And for me, at this moment in time, that is not going to motivate or inspire people. So for me, it's definitely about just putting a fish in a bowl and not asking them to climb a tree. Know yourself. Self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness. That's the key to understanding others. And then understand how your organisation have responded. So look at what's happened over the last 12 months and do a little bit of an emotional intelligence audit and go, okay, how did we respond? What stories might we have created within the organisation in the way that we responded to this? What damage do we need to repair through listening and acknowledging some of the stuff that we've done? Set some boundaries. Role models, so that's the consistency. Show up as consistently as you can. And if you can't, because I know it's really hard, just say to your team, I didn't show up today the way that I wanted to. Tomorrow's a new day and I'll try again tomorrow. And have your team try and do that as well, because we're going to have up and down days. And finally, focus on strength. It's like a shot of adrenaline, like happy adrenaline to the brain when someone's doing something that they feel really good at and they enjoy. Any more questions?
No more questions at the moment.
Amazing. So in the absence of Mark, so you're going to get sent a at the end of this, please don't log off straight away, because there'll be a little questionnaire that pops up, and if you want some time with me, if you want me to cover off any of this, it's free, no obligation, it's not a sales call, it's just me giving my time because I'm really passionate about this. There's an option for you to check a box to say yes, I'd like 30 minutes with Zoe, and you'll get sent a link to my diary and we can have a nice chit chat over Zoom and a cup of tea. And it'll also be great to understand how this webinar brought some value to you, and whether you can help us inform future webinar content. And just from myself and Mark, thank you so much, everybody. There's also an option there to donate to Bite Night as well, so the charity that Mark talked about at the beginning of the webinar. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And yeah, Darren, I guess that's it, isn't it? Is that how Mark would normally sign off?
I think it is. So just for anyone, in the handout section, you should be able to find a copy of the slides from today's session. Also, we will send out a follow-up email where you should hopefully get a copy of the recording and a copy of the slide pack from today. Please do take on the have a go at the survey afterwards. That's a real big help to us in terms of kind of improving our webinars going forward. And please do keep Bite Night in mind, and remember that this is kind of on their behalf as well that we're doing this. So yeah, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you all soon, hopefully.
Thank you.